Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Today, Kenji and I are going to be talking about identity, and we're going to be talking about identity redefined, the power of I am not. And this is a little bit of shift of some of the identity conversations we've had with you guys in the past, whether you've been reading our newsletter every week or maybe seen the 15 Days to Prosperity more recently, where there was a whole discussion about identity. So a little bit of a tweak, kind of interesting take on it that we wanted to make sure to bring into you guys.
Yeah, just to give you some context, one of the things that we like to do is claim different identities. In other words, not limit ourselves to I'm a doctor, right? Claim the identity of like, well, I'm also a real estate investor, right? And that's very powerful because when you claim that identity, if you don't claim that identity, then you're a doctor and you are not a real estate investor. But if you claim that, you say, okay, look, I can do both.
Yeah, and that allows you to kind of show up differently for people around you. So if you claim the identity of I'm a real estate investor, even if you don't own any properties, you show up with a different level of confidence. You show up with a different level of focus to the team around you, your real estate agent, your property manager, and it really does influence how they interact with you, all because you've claimed that identity. Just to give you another example that's not real estate related, a couple of years ago, I claimed the identity of I'm a person who works out 20 minutes a day. It's a very specific identity. And so I started working out 20 minutes a day, doing strength training. And it's an identity that sticks with me. Kenji can tell you sometimes at 10 at night, I'm like, I got to work out my 20 minutes. Like I'm a person who works out 20 minutes a day. That's literally my identity now. Should I have chosen an hour a day? Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I chose 20 minutes and that's what I'm sticking with. So what you tell yourself about who you are is so powerful because the human mind really wants to be consistent with what we tell people and what we tell ourselves about who we are and our personality and what's important to us and our values. And so when we say we are something, I am a real estate investor, I am amazing at finances, whatever it is. I'm a real estate mogul,
I'm a great dad.
right, all those things. Then you kind of start to show up in a different way because you believe that. So what we wanted to talk about today is the power I am not, which is the flip, right? Right, which is choosing the identities of who you are not and using that to kind of help shape your own behavior.
Yeah, and I wanted to provide reason for this. At least one. There's many reasons why I think I am not statements are maybe just as powerful, or maybe even more powerful than I am statements. The problem I see with I am statements, and I've heard many people talk about this, is that in the back of your mind actually sometimes doesn't believe it, right? And
Or your subconscious doesn't believe it,
that's
right?
right.
You
And you
say it and you're just like,
right,
you got that
exactly.
little bit of feeling of tension.
Right. So, like, I'll just give you a personal example. Like, I could say, "Oh, I'm a great dad," but then those times that I'm not, I'm just like, "Ooh," like, and I remember those things, right? And so it just doesn't kind of ring true or 100% true in my mind. And again, a lot of it is this subconscious, and so it just doesn't quite hit as well as the I am not statements. And I'll give you an example of an I am not statement. You were talking about, I am the person who works out 20 minutes a day. Well, my I am not statement was, I am not the type of person who has a dad bod, right? And so I just refused to have a dad bod. And that's what really got me going. And it was just, I hit this threshold. I was so sick of it. And I started running every day.
Right. And so the I am not statements really mean that you're no longer going to tolerate a certain thing in your life. And you can make I am not statements about, yeah, your health. You can make it about your wealth, right? I am not a person who is going to tolerate making, the lowest amount in my practice, right? I'm going to get better at negotiation. I'm not going to let this happen again. Like I'm not that type of person. And so you can go either way. I'm a phenomenal negotiator and I'm going to go get those skills, or I'm becoming a phenomenal negotiator and I'm going to love negotiating. And that eventually may be an identity you choose is I love negotiating. Or you can go the other way and be like, you know what? No longer am I going to be the person who doesn't negotiate and literally gets paid for the same amount of work, the least amount.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about that psychology behind the I am not statements. And so, humans are motivated either to avoid pain or pursue pleasure, right? Those are the kind of two big drivers. And so, if you think about the I am not statements, it's really to avoid pain, right?
Or
Because
you already have pain and you're trying to avoid future pain, further pain, right?
right, right, exactly. So I think that and the studies show that people are more motivated by avoiding that pain, and so I think that that's the reason why these "I am not" statements can be so powerful. And again, in personal experience, I found them to be extremely motivating to achieve whatever it is that I want to achieve.
What's so interesting, if you think about this in the extreme, and this may be hard for some of you to swallow or to, maybe you've never even considered it before, is everything you have in your life right now is your minimum standard. It's what you are willing to not tolerate lower in your life, right? So let's say you're making, 100,000 a year, and everyone around you, who's your same specialty is making 150. Would you have tolerated making 70? No, you didn't. You're right. You had a minimum standard, and you're at your minimum standard, and you stayed at your minimum standard because it's your minimum standard of what you're willing to tolerate. And if you kind of increase your standard, which is what you can do with these "I am not" statements, is you say, what I'm doing right now is no longer tolerable. I'm more in some way, again, it can be in any area of your life. You're raising your standard, and that becomes your standard, then it's something you're never going to go back at. Another way one of our mentors puts us is, he says everybody has a temperature. Maybe your temperature is 80 degrees, and you start going down and you get down to 70, 70, 65. Your body, you say, this is not me, this is unacceptable. I will not tolerate this. And you're going to start working to get back into the 80-degree range. Likewise, you might get up to 90 degrees and you might say, this doesn't feel comfortable. And you'll start self-sabotaging to go back to 80. So you can think of this in terms of finances. Maybe you're a person who says, I will live in a house that's $500,000. I'm going to have, my kids are going to go to private school. This is the absolute minimum for me. And you get to a situation, you have all this excess money, people will start to self-sabotage because it's not consistent with who they see they are. And things will happen that they will actually destroy a lot of that wealth that was additional because it doesn't make sense for who their vision is. So there's a constant upgrading of what needs to happen for your identity over time. And part of that is saying, I am not this person anymore. I am becoming, or I am this other version of myself.
Yeah, I think so. What you're saying is that it's really a combination of these two, right? It's claiming those identities that you are, but also rejecting the identities that you want to avoid or move away from. And so it's I think it's a combination of these two that make it very, very powerful. And again, like I said, there are a lot of people out there talking about the importance of affirmations, the I ams. And again, just wanted to emphasize in this episode that there are a whole another set of affirmations that are very powerful about "I am not." And so again, just that as you think about if you are going to adopt these affirmations, then think about both sides because I think they can be very powerful.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to think about the fact that you interact with your kids and you're kind of setting the tone for what the family is. One of my favorite it's not really a parenting book. It's more of a family, how to run your family book, is Patrick Lencioni book called Three Questions for a Frantic Family, or something like that. Three Big Questions for a Frantic Family. And it talks about kind of setting the cultural values for your family. And when you're setting cultural values, you really are setting of what you are, but at the same time, you are setting who you're not as a family. And so I remember we've had a number of times now that our kids have said to us, we don't give up. Our family, you said never give up. Like this is our family. Like part of our family, we're teaching our kids is persistence, right? Even in the face of things being hard, we persist, we continue to look to find a way, we pivot, we're resourceful. And so they've called us out a couple of times, and they're like, you said we don't give up. And that's our identity as a family.
Now, I wanted to kind of give some more examples of some of these "I am not" identities that maybe you guys can think about and add to, maybe even adopt some of these. The first one is "I don't quit," and this is actually the title of a podcast that I listen to. Is a motivation podcast, and literally the whole podcast episode talks about it's a compilation of lots of different people talking about how they don't quit, and it's very, very powerful. It's actually one of the most, for me, one of the most powerful ones that really kind of keeps me going, gives me that resilience. It just kind of keeps me persevering and not giving up. And so I really love that one. Again, "I don't quit." it.
And we are talking to all of you guys who are real estate investors or becoming real estate investors, or you're entrepreneurs. And I would say real estate is an entrepreneurial venture. So you're entrepreneurs too. And part of what is it takes to become a successful entrepreneur is not quitting. There are so many times that things will look challenging. There's so many times that a problem will look insurmountable. There are so many times that you're like tired, and you really start to question, why am I doing what I'm doing? Maybe somebody attacks you on social media, or something doesn't turn out well. There are going to be times like that, and that I'm not a quitter identity is such a powerful one for being to able to get through those times. And again, you can have the other I am identity on the other side, which is I'm resourceful and I always find a way, right? That's the other side of it. You can choose either, or you can do both of them, but having, I'm not a quitter is really, really powerful in those situations.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think you can choose either one,
Or do
whichever,
both.
or do both, whichever one resonates with you, or if both resonate with you. Again, we're just wanting to give you guys tools, right? And this is yet another tool, these I am not identities. I wanted to share another example. This one, I actually heard Marie Forleo talk one time, and literally, she it was about a 20-minute talk, and this was the one thing that I pulled out from it, and I thought it was awesome. Anytime somebody gives a talk and you pull something out of it, I think it's a good talk, right? And so what she said was, she's sharing a story about how she was really overwhelmed. She just got so fed up with it, she just decided, I don't do overwhelm. And I just remember that so clearly, and I really love that one because have we all felt overwhelmed at points? Of course we have, right? But I love this idea of just declaring I don't do overwhelm, because when you catch yourself in overwhelm, then you go to this, this rings in my head. It's like I don't do overwhelm, and then you just go, okay, yeah, I'm over it. Like I'm moving on, right? I'm not going to let myself be overwhelmed. And I think it's a really, really effective strategy for kind of promoting calmness. It's a great way to manage your stress. And so I think it's a very, very powerful I am not identity.
Another one is, I'm not defined by my mistakes. So all of us make mistakes. We call them learning opportunities over here because we have plenty of learning opportunities and plenty of mistakes, plenty of errors that we have made in our real estate journey, in our day to day, in our relationship, in our parenting, all of these things. And what that really allows you to do is, have self forgiveness, have the idea that actually you do the best you can with the knowledge and the information and the tools you have at the time, right? So this also allows you to not have this guilt going backwards of like, oh, I did this thing 5 years ago that I'm really like, I wish I hadn't done. I was really embarrassed about. Well, what if you did exactly what you could have done, the best you could have done in that situation because of the information you had and who you were at the time and your skill sets, right? And so again, this is a two ways of putting it, right? I'm not defined by my mistakes. I'm going to forgive myself, or also I did the best I can, and there's no need for guilt anymore. There's no need for regret. You do the best you can and you move on.
Yeah, another one that I think a lot about, especially with the kids, is, and similar to this one, is like, I don't let fear get in the way of trying something new, right? Because this happens with our kids a lot, is that anytime they're trying something new, whether it's something new in school or maybe it's something athletic that they've never done before, there's that fear, right? But I want to encourage them, like, hey, fear is okay, but courage is when you push through and you do it anyway, even though you're afraid. And so if you kind of declare, like, I don't let fear get in the way of me trying something new, if you kind of declare that and embrace that identity, then it can be very powerful. It can help really push you to grow, and grow a lot quicker.
Yeah, and Kenji's talking about declaring that. And so that's actually speaking it out loud, right? Or writing it if you want to write it, or both, or, at least having this repetitive thought of that. And when you have these declarative statements that you make about I am not, or I am, and you're declaring them, you're repeating them, you're writing them down, it's kind of reinforcing the mental circuitry so that when you get into that situation, you catch yourself and you move right into that groove in your brain, right? All the neurons are aligned. You move right back into it and you're like, oh, I'm not that person. And that allows you, all these statements, all these I am not statements give you these clear boundaries and allows you to kind of recognize right away, snap out of it, move to that new kind of I am or I'm not doing this kind of clear boundary line of like, yeah, this isn't happening. It's black or white, right? And moves right into that other area.
Mhm.
It also allows you to kind of quickly disassociate, kind of move on quickly instead of lingering and suffering or whatever about it. So, for example, so thinking back to, I'm not defined by my mistakes. If you say to yourself, I'm not defined by my mistakes, you have that immediate dissociation, you stop the suffering and you move on. And then lastly, it can really give you some more motivation when you kind of say, oh, I'm not that person, you get that more energy. You're like, I'm this person, and you just move on, right? And it's I think it's really useful to use in your day-to-day, but it does take a little bit of repetition. It does take declaring, making statements, writing things down to really get it into your body. So it's not just a mental thought, but it's actually a way of being in yourself. And we've talked about that in previous podcasts as well. You should definitely go check that out.
Yeah, I wanted to share an example from our real estate courses. When people come into our real estate courses, they learn a lot in a very, very short a time. But when they come in, they oftentimes perceive of themselves as newbies, even after several weeks of learning and really growing a lot. And so, one identity that we talk about that's very important to claim right up front is I am a real estate investor. I'm a real estate baron. Could be another example,
And maybe the opposite of that is I am not a newbie.
right?
And, sometimes we have to help create the pillars of beliefs under each of these things. So if they're saying, I'm just a newbie, and we're trying to convince them, like, hey, actually, you aren't just a newbie. We talk about how many people who are quote unquote real estate investors are completely doing it blind. They don't know how to use a cash and cash calculator. They don't know how to analyze the property. They don't know how to triangulate data. They're not doing due diligence. They're missing so many pieces. And so even 4 weeks into our course, people are putting in offers. And I'll tell you, they know more than a lot of real estate investors who've been doing it for years. They just don't know that yet. They don't have a context of understanding how a lot of people buy real estate blindly, thinking they know what they're doing, and they're buying liabilities, and they're not even looking at cash and cash calculators. We see it all the time. They don't have the context to see that. And so literally we can say, you're not a newbie. Let me tell you all the ways that you are more advanced right now in week 4 of our course than probably 70% of the real estate investors out there. And then we can give them that context and that evidence to help them move into this space of saying, I am a real estate investor. In fact, I'm going to be a better real estate investor than most of the real estate investors out there in just a couple months. And that is truly the reality. They just don't have the context to understand it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great, really great to see them embrace that I am not a newbie anymore, right? And like you said, you give them some reasons why they're not a newbie anymore. But I also think within that statement is also a little bit of like, that newbie becomes kind of a bad word, and they don't want to really associate themselves as a newbie anymore. So they're kind of pushing that away, and I think that that's part of it. And so that's a great way for them to kind of shift to, well, I am a real estate investor. I am starting to become a real estate baron.
And notice one thing that I mentioned though that we hadn't really talked about to this point in this podcast is getting evidence, right? Getting legs under that table that I'm a real estate investor, getting evidence for it, or I am not just a newbie, getting evidence for it. So you really strengthen that position. And you probably have a lot of evidence around you that you've really ignored. So you have to spend a little bit of time looking for that evidence. It can come from other examples around you. It can come from others kind of pointing out some things that you don't know. And sometimes it can come from you reflecting on your past and being like, you know what? I did do that cash and cash calculator awfully quickly last week. And oh, my real estate agent said I talk like a pro. Like, let me get some evidence under this table that I am not just a newbie. And then you can feel more and more confident in really that being true. So overall, just kind of wrapping all of this up, we wanted to say, there are I am statements, there's I'm not statements. Both of them are really, really useful. The I am not can be more powerful for some people, especially because it's avoidance of future pain, right? And so some people will gravitate more towards that. I would say some of us, I personally am one of those people that gravitates towards I am, and I can go with it, and I can believe it fully, and I could jump right into it. But
Yeah, and
not
I'm
not
and I'm
everyone's like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the opposite. Yeah, I'm more driven by the I am not for sure.
Yeah. And so you have both at your disposal. You can use either tools. You can pick and match right for you and right for the situation. But we'd really encourage you to watch of what you say that you are or you are not, because you truly become that person. And so make sure you're doing whatever you're doing very intentionally, by choice, not based on what other people said you are or are not, but why you what you choose you want to be yourself, right? Intentionally. Thank you for joining us at this episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. It's always fun to be with all of you. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with a friend, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, and we will see you next episode.